2 hours after burying my youngest son, my phone rang with a call that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. I'm Vincent Pierce, 58 years old, and I've spent the last 30 years building Pierce Construction Enterprises from nothing into a $650 million empire here in Dallas. Started with a pickup truck, a toolbox, and dreams bigger than my bank account. Now we've got 850 employees, and our cranes dot the Dallas skyline like steel prayers reaching toward heaven. But none of that mattered as I sat alone in my Preston Hollow study, still wearing the black suit from Maxwell's funeral. Through the window, the late afternoon Texas sun cast shadows across the mahogany desk where Max and I used to review his architectural drawings together. He'd spread out those blueprints like treasure maps, pointing to sustainable design features with the enthusiasm I once had for foundation pours and steel beams. He'd been 26, brilliant, full of a future in green architecture that would never come. The doctors called it sudden organ failure. Rare, unexplainable. A healthy young man gone in less than a week. I kept thinking about our last conversation, how he'd mentioned feeling tired, run down. I'd told him to get more sleep, eat better, standard dad advice, if I'd known someone was slowly poisoning him. My wife Margaret had been gone for 3 years now. Cancer took her the same year Max graduated from UT Dallas with his architecture degree. She would have been so proud watching him walk across that stage. I was proud enough for both of us, but it wasn't the same. Now Maxwell was gone too. The house felt like a tomb filled with ghosts of better times, echoing with Margaret's laugh and Max's excited chatter about LEED certifications and sustainable building materials. "Dad?" Spencer's voice drifted from the living room. My eldest son had stayed close since Max's death, handling the funeral arrangements, fielding calls from business associates, making sure I ate something. At 32, he'd been with Pierce Construction for 8 years now, working his way up from project manager to VP of operations. Smart, capable, everything you'd want in a successor. "You need anything?" I didn't answer immediately. The mourners had left an hour ago, their hollow condolences still echoing in my ears. He's in a better place now. Time heals all wounds. God needed another angel. Empty words from people who'd never buried a child. The construction industry folks understood better. They knew loss, knew that some foundations crack beyond repair. Spencer had given a beautiful eulogy about Max, talking about brotherly love and shared dreams, how they used to build with Legos together as kids, how Max would design elaborate structures while Spencer figured out how to make them stable. The perfect partnership, he'd said. Architecture and engineering, vision and execution. I'd been so proud of both my boys in that moment. That's when my phone buzzed against my leg. The name on the screen made me sit up straight. Professor Catherine Walsh, Maxwell's architecture professor at UT Dallas. She'd been at the funeral that morning, tears streaming down her face as she placed a white rose on the casket. One of Max's favorite professors, the one who'd pushed him toward sustainable design. I answered on the third ring. "Professor Walsh, Mr. Pierce." Her voice trembled like autumn leaves in a Dallas storm. "I found something in Maxwell's belongings. You need to see this." My chest tightened. The university had said they'd box up his things from his senior studio space. What kind of something? I can't explain over the phone. Her breathing was ragged, uneven. "Please come to my office at the university right now. Architecture building, 3rd floor, room 315. I glanced toward the living room where Spencer was tidying up, stacking sympathy cards and organizing flower arrangements. He'd been so helpful, so present, everything a good son should be during a crisis. "Can't this wait until tomorrow? It's been a long day." "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. "Mr. Pierce, please don't tell anyone you're coming, not even—" She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Not even your other son. This is dangerous." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding against my ribs. Dangerous. What could possibly be dangerous about Max's belongings? Architectural models, design portfolios? But something in Professor Walsh's voice made every instinct I'd developed in 30 years of construction work scream that this wasn't nothing. When you've built buildings from the ground up, you learn to trust your gut about structural problems. This felt like foundation failure. Spencer appeared in the doorway, his face creased with concern. Still wearing his funeral suit, his tie loosened slightly. He looked older than his 32 years, the weight of responsibility showing in the lines around his eyes. Going somewhere, Dad? I forced what I hoped was a convincing, tired smile. Just need to drive. Clear my head. You know how it is. He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of his cologne. Something expensive, European. When had he started wearing cologne to work? Want company? I don't think you should be alone right now. No, I need some time alone. Won't be long. I stood, my knees protesting slightly. Getting older, feeling every one of my 58 years. The business had been good to me financially, but the stress and long hours had taken their toll physically. Spencer pulled me into a brief hug, his arms strong from years of construction work. Take your time, Dad. I'll be here when you get back. I'll handle anything that comes up. I patted his shoulder, remembering when he was small, how he'd follow me around job sites wearing a tiny hard hat Margaret had bought him. You're a good son, Spencer. The words tasted bitter in my mouth now, though I didn't know why at the time. 20 minutes later, I was pulling my truck into the visitor parking at UT Dallas. The campus was nearly deserted on a Saturday evening, live oaks casting long shadows across the walkways. I'd been here countless times over the years, first when Spencer was studying construction management, then when Max declared architecture as his major. The pride I'd felt watching both my boys graduate from this place seemed like a lifetime ago now. The architecture building loomed ahead, its modern glass facade reflecting the orange-pink Texas sky. I remembered the day Max had first brought me here, excitedly showing off the design studios and talking about his professors. Professor Walsh had been his favorite, tough but fair, pushing students to think beyond conventional building methods. She'd written a glowing recommendation letter when Max applied for the graduate sustainable design program he'd never get to attend. I took the stairs to the third floor, my boots echoing in the empty corridor. The climb left me slightly winded. Too many years of stress eating and not enough exercise. Margaret used to nag me about that, said she didn't want me having a heart attack at some job site. Now I wished I'd listened better. Professor Walsh's office was at the end of the hall, room 315. I'd been here 2 years ago when Max declared his specialization in green building technology. The door stood slightly ajar. Light spilled into the darkened hallway, and I heard voices, one familiar, one terrified. I told you to stay out of this, a male voice said, low and threatening. A voice I knew as well as my own. Give it to me now. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Please, this isn't... Professor Walsh's voice, frightened, pleading. I said, give it to me. Do you have any idea what this could do to my family? I moved closer, pulse hammering against my temples like a construction jackhammer. Through the gap in the door, I caught a glimpse of Professor Walsh backed against her filing cabinet, hands raised defensively. Her face was white as fresh concrete, eyes wide with terror. And standing before her, gripping what looked like a worn leather journal, Max's journal, the one he'd carried everywhere since high school, was Spencer. My eldest son. The man who was supposed to be home grieving with me, helping me plan the memorial service. Instead, he was here, cornering a terrified woman in her office. Spencer, please, Professor Walsh whispered. Maxwell trusted you. This journal, it shows. It shows nothing, Spencer snapped. Max was sick, paranoid. You have no idea what kind of stress he was under with graduation coming up. People see things that aren't there when they're overwhelmed. I didn't think. I pushed the door open. The hinges creaked like an old barn door. Spencer spun around, his face cycling through emotions faster than Texas weather. Fury to shock to that practiced mask of concern he wore so well. My eldest son, still in his funeral suit, holding his dead brother's journal like evidence of his own guilt. Dad? Spencer's voice smoothed out instantly. Becoming the caring son I thought I knew. What are you doing here? For a moment, I couldn't force words through my throat. The office smelled like old books and fear sweat. Behind Spencer, Professor Walsh was pressed against the filing cabinet, her fingers trembling like she was having a seizure. I could ask you the same thing, I managed finally. You told me you'd be home. Spencer glanced at the journal, then back at me, his expression softening into something apologetic. The same look he'd worn as a kid when I'd catch him in some minor mischief. I couldn't just sit around, Dad. I needed to do something productive. I came to collect Max's things before the university clears everything out. You know how institutions are. They'll toss his work into storage or worse. He gestured toward Professor Walsh with practiced ease. Professor Walsh here was helping me gather his projects, his research materials. We want to make sure nothing important gets lost." Professor Walsh nodded too quickly, like a bobblehead in an earthquake. Her eyes flickered to mine, desperate and terrified. She was trying to tell me something, but Spencer was watching her like a hawk watches a field mouse. "That's thoughtful of you," I said, my construction worker instincts telling me something was structurally unsound about this whole situation. Max would appreciate that. Spencer stepped toward me, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. The same gesture he'd used to comfort me at the funeral. Now it felt like a lead blanket. "Let's go home, Dad. You shouldn't be driving all over tonight. You need rest, and I need to make sure you're taking care of yourself." He turned to Professor Walsh with a smile that would have fooled anyone who didn't know what I'd just witnessed. "Thank you for your help, Professor. I'll return Monday morning for the rest of Max's materials. We really appreciate your cooperation during this difficult time." She nodded again, her face pale as primer paint. "Of course. Anything to help." As Spencer guided me toward the door, his arm around my shoulders in what anyone else would see as brotherly support, Professor Walsh's hand moved in a quick, precise motion. Something small and white slipped into my coat pocket faster than a pickpocket's grab. When I turned for one last look, our eyes met. Her lips shaped a single word that hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest: run. Outside the building, Spencer walked me to my truck like he was escorting an elderly relative to safety. His sleek black BMW sat 3 spaces away from my truck, gleaming under the parking lot lights like a predator waiting to strike. When had Spencer started driving BMWs? Last I remembered, he had a practical Ford F-150 for job sites. Construction work didn't usually pay for German luxury cars, even at the VP level. "See you at home," he said, pulling me into what felt like a goodbye hug. "Drive safe, Dad, and remember, you don't need to handle everything yourself. I'm here for whatever you need." The words sounded caring, supportive, everything a grieving father would want to hear. But underneath the comfort, I heard something else. A warning, maybe, or a threat. He drove off first, his taillights disappearing into Dallas traffic. Only when I was sure he was gone did I reach into my coat pocket with trembling fingers. The note Professor Walsh had slipped me was torn from a notepad, her handwriting shaky and urgent. Journal. His room under mattress. Run. My hands shook as I started my truck. The drive back to Preston Hollow felt endless, every red light an eternity. My thoughts kept spiraling back to Spencer's voice in that office. Cold, threatening, nothing like the son I thought I knew. And Professor Walsh's terrified face, the way she'd pressed herself against that filing cabinet, like she expected to be hit. I turned onto Hillcrest Avenue. Spencer's BMW was already parked in its usual spot beside the circular driveway. Through our front windows, I could see him moving around the living room, probably straightening up the remaining funeral flowers and sympathy cards, playing the dutiful son. I sat in my truck for 5 long minutes, watching the house where I'd raised my family, where Margaret and I had brought both boys home from the hospital, where we'd celebrated birthdays and graduations and promotions. Now it felt like enemy territory. Finally, Spencer disappeared down the hallway toward his bedroom. I slipped inside as quietly as my construction boots would allow. The house was eerily quiet, filled with the lingering scent of funeral flowers and the ghosts of better times. Max's room was exactly as he'd left it. Bed unmade, architecture textbooks stacked on his desk like small skyscrapers, his laptop still open to a sustainable design project. The half-finished scale model of a green office complex he'd been perfecting for his senior thesis, complete with solar panels and rain collection systems. Everything suspended in time, waiting for a young man who would never come home. The faint trace of his cologne still clung to the air, that light, clean scent he'd started wearing after graduation. It hit me like a physical blow, tightening my chest until I could barely breathe. This was my baby boy's room, the kid who used to build elaborate Lego cities and dream about designing real ones someday. But I pushed the grief aside. Professor Walsh had risked her life to get me here. I had a job to do. I lifted the corner of Max's mattress. There, pressed against the box spring like a hidden treasure, lay his worn leather journal, the same one he'd carried since high school, filled with sketches and ideas and dreams. I'd bought it for him as a graduation gift from high school, embossed with his initials, MJP, Maxwell James Pierce. I opened to the first entry, dated 3 months ago. Max's neat handwriting filled the pages, the same careful script he'd used for his architectural drawings. Week 1. Spencer gave me premium vitamins today, said they'd help. With stress during finals and job interviews, he's been so supportive lately, checking on me, bringing me food when I'm working late. It feels good to have my big brother looking out for me. He said successful construction executives need to stay sharp, take care of their health. I turned the page, ice forming in my stomach despite the Texas heat. Week 3. Feeling nauseous a lot. Tired all the time, even after sleeping 10 hours. Maybe I'm overworked. Spencer says the vitamins will help boost my energy, so I keep taking them. He insists I need the extra support during this transition period. He brings them to me personally, makes sure I don't forget. My hands started trembling as I read further. Week 5. Something's definitely wrong. I looked up my symptoms online: fatigue, nausea, muscle weakness, confusion. Nothing fits perfectly, but the pattern is weird. But every time I take those vitamins Spencer gives me, I feel worse for the next few hours. Maybe I'm imagining things. Spencer seems so concerned about my health, always asking how I'm feeling. Week 7. Found the bottle when Spencer wasn't home yesterday. He'd left it on my desk with a note to take to with dinner. No brand label, no FDA markings, just chemical codes stamped on the plastic. I took a photo with my phone. Why would he give me something like this? There has to be an explanation. Maybe it's some new supplement his doctor recommended? A photograph was taped to the page, a small amber bottle, completely blank except for industrial-looking codes that meant nothing to me but suddenly felt ominous as hell. I flipped to the final entry, dated just 3 days before Max died. My son's handwriting had gotten shaky, uncertain. I'm scared, really scared. The symptoms match heavy metal poisoning. I researched it at the library because I didn't want the search history on my computer. If I tell Dad, it'll destroy our family. Spencer's his firstborn, his heir apparent at the company. Maybe there's still an explanation. Spencer's my brother. He wouldn't. He couldn't. Could he? But I can't ignore this anymore. The chest pains started yesterday. What do I do? The entry ended abruptly, like Max had been interrupted mid-thought. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, getting closer. Dad? Spencer's voice called from the hallway, getting closer. Dad, are you in there? I slipped the journal inside my jacket and moved toward Max's window. My son's room had a small balcony overlooking our backyard, and beside it, the old fire escape. Metal stairs zigzagging down the side of our 1920s house like an emergency skeleton. I'd installed it myself 15 years ago when Margaret worried about safety codes. Now, it might save my life. I unlocked the window as quietly as possible, my heart hammering against my ribs. The night air hit me, humid and thick with the scent of magnolia from our neighbor's yard. I swung my leg over the sill just as Max's bedroom door burst open behind me. Dad, what the hell? I didn't look back. My dress shoes slipped on the wet metal as I descended, the journal pressing against my chest like evidence of my family's destruction. Above me, Spencer was shouting something, but I couldn't make out the words over the blood rushing in my ears. 20 feet down, my shoes hit the grass. I ran through our backyard, past the pool where my boys had learned to swim, past the oak tree where I'd pushed them on swings, through the side gate and onto Hillcrest Avenue. My phone buzzed as I reached the street corner. Roderick Davis, my CFO and closest friend for 15 years, the most trustworthy man I knew. Roderick, I gasped, I need help. Corner of Hillcrest and Preston. Can you pick me up? Vincent, what's wrong? I'll explain later. Please, just come. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Roderick's apartment downtown, showing him Max's journal. His face went through the same horrible progression mine had: confusion, disbelief, then sick understanding. Spencer poisoned him, he said quietly. His own brother. That night, we planned our investigation. Roderick helped me access Spencer's office computer at Pierce Construction, where we found emails between Spencer and Frederick Sterling, our CFO. The correspondence was damning. Discussions about handling the succession problem, payments for untraceable substances, and worst of all, Spencer's cold calculation about splitting $950,000 in embezzled company funds once I was out of the picture. We planted listening devices. We recorded Spencer's phone calls with Frederick, capturing his voice saying things that still haunt my dreams. I should have done this years ago. Dad always loved Max more, The golden boy architect? Well, not anymore. But we didn't go to the police. Not yet. I wanted the world to see what my son had become. The Pierce Construction annual gala at the Fairmont Dallas was our stage. 500 guests, investors, city officials, business leaders, media. The event where Spencer would be officially announced as president and my successor. He stood at the podium in his midnight blue suit, delivering a speech about family legacy and the future of construction in Texas, about how his late brother Max would have been proud of the sustainable building initiatives Pierce Construction was implementing. Then I walked onto that stage. The gasps from the audience sounded like a collective intake of breath before a building collapse. Spencer's face went white as unpainted drywall. "I'm here to tell the truth about my son's death," I said into the microphone. The screens behind us flickered to life. Max's journal entries appeared, magnified for everyone to see, his handwriting growing increasingly desperate as the weeks progressed. Photos of unmarked bottles, then the emails between Spencer and Frederick. The final blow was the audio recording of Spencer's voice. "I should have done this years ago. Dad always loved Max more." Well, not anymore. The ballroom erupted. Reporters surged forward. Spencer tried to run, but 500 people had heard everything. There was nowhere to hide from that kind of truth. Detective Patricia Williams arrested both Spencer and Frederick that night. The evidence was overwhelming: journal, emails, recordings, financial records of the embezzlement scheme. Frederick broke first, confirming everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. Spencer held out until the trial, but the jury needed only 4 hours to convict. Life imprisonment without parole. Both of them. 6 months later, I stood in the offices of the Maxwell Pierce Memorial Foundation, watching our first scholarship recipient review architectural plans for a sustainable housing project. The foundation had become my life's work, funded by the sale of Pierce Construction. I couldn't run the company anymore. Too many memories, too much blood on those steel beams. I still think about Professor Catherine Walsh sometimes. She'd been found dead the night after she called me, officially ruled a suicide, but we all knew better. She'd died trying to save a young man she barely knew, trying to protect a father from learning the worst truth imaginable. But she'd succeeded in the end. Justice was served. Looking back, I see a father who built an empire but failed to see the rot in his own foundation. I was so focused on steel and concrete that I missed the poison growing in my eldest son's heart. The gambling debts, the resentment, the sick jealousy that turned love into murder. If this story teaches anything, it's that we must know our children's souls, not just their achievements. Success means nothing if it breeds the kind of envy that can destroy families from within. The greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's integrity, compassion, and the knowledge that love isn't something you have to kill for. Spencer took Max's life, but Max's legacy lives on through others. Sometimes that has to be enough. Even when justice is served, it doesn't bring back the dead. Nothing ever will.